I want to know that things work. I want to know that there is such a thing as truth. I also want to know that there's such a thing as goodness. Because again, like the lonely relativist who's caught up in their own world has a hard time affirming that there is suffering in this world, actual suffering and potential suffering, and I am a moral agent. It's no consolation in the long run to say, well, I'm a moral relativist. Where does that leave you? That kills your conscience. That drives you to despair, like you're just saying. I'm a moral agent. And the world needs me to be authentic, to be real, to care about truth, and to enact goodness, effectively to love. There are different kinds of love. There are appropriate ways to love in with different relationships. But the world needs me to love. I need to love the truth. I need to love goodness, and I need to love myself as an agent of both.
Welcome everyone back to Out of the Box podcast. This is Jose, your co-host with Steele. Today we are super excited and honored to have one of our professors from St. Mary's University, Dr. Greenaway, and he works with the philosophy department. And aside from being a great professor, he has also done some great work with helping at different prisons, helping with human dignity in terms of human trafficking. So he has done a lot of great work in those areas and using his expertise to really spark up interesting conversations about these topics. And so we are really happy to have you, Dr. Greenaway. Thank you for accepting the invitation.
Oh, it's an honor. It's nice to catch up with former students.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And so I know we were talking before we started that we were going to get into the topic of how politics and law sometimes, does it benefit or does it not from having God in the picture? And so just wanted to get your initial thoughts on that. Is that something that you've seen with other philosophers that they've kind of questioned before? Just what are some thoughts in regards to that?
So a very nice narrow question then. I don't even know where to pitch in with that. You're basically asking, are you not, whether God is needed for politics or for law?
Yes.
Okay. Well, okay. First of all, we'd have to know what we mean by politics or law, and we would certainly have to know what we mean by God. I mean, if you mean by, if not you, but if one means by God, some sort of Zeus type character, a deity on the clouds, and there are a lot of people who, I suppose, call themselves Christians or who reject Christianity because they think that that's basically what God amounts to. Somebody on the clouds, looking down and whatever. And we need our images. We do need our images. But the deeper meaning of God is probably the name that God reveals or gives in Scripture. Yahweh, I am who am. It's the notion of pure being, limitless being, not a beginning, not an end. And, in the philosophical tradition as well, you have somebody called Parmenides. And he seems to have had some sort of, mystical religious experience. He caught a glimpse of the ultimate conditions of being. And afterwards, when he tried to express it, all he could say was, is, with an exclamation mark. So when we talk about God, God's a handy name to use. But as Thomas Aquinas tells us, There's a better name, and it's quite simply being. So to come back to the question, do you need being for politics and law? I would say, yeah, you do. Do you, does one mean by that, by God, a particular religious tradition? Maybe to have particular kinds of politics and law, you do. Mm. Because beneath every politics and law, there is what we might understand as a philosophical anthropology. There's an understanding of what human beings are. And that understanding can be pegged with how we understand our lives to be and what transcendence is and what the purpose of human life is and what the ultimate conditions of being are. So already we have notions of God or divine being sort of implicitly present in how we understand ourselves to be. And if you want a politics and if you want a law that's actually appropriate, it better fit the philosophical anthropology. Like one of the things that we tend to do, and I don't know if this is peculiar to America or not. America being a very, political place, which is not a bad thing. Potentially not a bad thing, potentially not a good thing, but it's a very political place. If you want to have a politics that really works, it's got to be able to fit our understanding of what a human person is and to extrapolate out what human communities are. And sometimes, you need to sort of go beyond politics itself. One of the fields of study that I've spent a lot of time in is medieval thought. And one of the most characteristic features of political thought is of medieval thought is how unpolitical it is. I mean, politics is there. They do talk about politics, but it's like that big compared to everything else. And that, to my mind, seems about right. Because it means that you're working out, among other things, what a human person is. So the medievals would have done it by thinking about predominantly, metaphysics and epistemology. What is being? What is real? And how do we know that? And so they're working out this anthropology of what we are, where we exist, how we belong, how we relate to the cosmos. And the cosmos is you, is this world, it's the ultimate conditions of life, and it's me, how I relate to me. So they were busy at work with all of those primordial relationships. And politics has its place. Yeah. So, there's a lot of work that has to be done before we say, well, do you need God for politics and law?
And I think you opened it up really well, because it's almost inherent of beings to create structures, right? To that coincide with who they are, right? It's kind of like what you were saying of belonging. They want to have some sort of structure where kind of values the people. It's almost like a democratic, government, right? Where the people are the essence of what the government is doing, right? Because it identifies them, it represents them. And so I guess to your point, in order to have a good government, the government has to represent the subordinates, right? The people and what they represent and what they belong to, who they are, right? And so with that being said, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the fact that we are beings and that there's an association of God being, right, just being, then it states that we ourselves take part in that being because we are being, right?
Our name for that is existence. That's our share in being. Like, it sounds very mystical, but it's actually very concrete. We have a beginning, we have an end, right? We can't even, it's really hard to even say it in language, but we cannot be, like, we exist. We have a share in being.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, and so, and it's not just pure existence either. It's like an attunement to the ground of the ground that holds us, what sustains us. You know, we have to work out what our lives are for, but they seem to be about something. I mean, look at you, like you're doing something here. You found it worthwhile. There's some things that you've come to know. You've paid attention to many of your experiences. You've come to understand certain things about life in general and your life in particular by being intelligent and attentive. You've made some really good judgments about the truth of things. And now you've made a decision to follow certain worthwhile paths. And that's what this is. So our lives are about something. We're reaching out for truth. We're reaching out to enact goodness. We seem to be called to love. Yeah, maybe I'll just stop there for a moment because I could go off on another spiel.
It made me think of something. What were you gonna say?
No, it's okay. I was going to say something there about truth and goodness, but go ahead.
It just made me think when you were saying a counter argument popped up, or a different argument that I've heard with existential philosophers saying that we create our own meaning. And yeah, what would you say to that?
Well, it's partly true, I would say. It might be better to say we discover meaning. Again, it comes down to this philosophical anthropology that I was talking about. If your notion of being is that it's a great big empty space with a couple of planets in it, held together by a couple of forces, but basically it's just empty, then in principle, we're like atoms just floating in a vacuum.
Yes, exactly. We're just, everything's by chance, and atoms.
Yeah, but we exist in a cosmos. We begin from a pattern of relationalities, and I enumerated them earlier when I was talking about how the cosmos basically is you, and it's me, and it's the natural world, and it's the ultimate conditions, like the mystery that there's such a world at all. That's all part of it, and it's how I relate to myself. So this is the cosmos, and we are right there. Every one of us is like a hub, right at the very center of the cosmos. We're always in relation. We're not lonely, solitary atoms. I mean, you could go around and tell yourself that and decide to live your life like that, but it's nihilistic and it's not going to end well for anybody. I mean, what do you say to your children?
Right.
You are no more than a solitary little atom floating in an empty space. Your life comes to nothing. It means nothing.
Yeah, there's
but
no.
I love you.
Right, and the depression can set in, and what's the point of life? Right, and does what it be saying, like, we're all just atoms, that's all we are, just by chance, and everything's by chance, is to almost say that we're like robots without any emotions or any free will or any kind of logical, rational way of going about life, you know?
And yet, as Jose was saying earlier, I mean, we do try to create structures because what matters to us is that we get things right. So what does that mean? It means that we're able to verify our truth claims. And so things work. I jump on an airplane If I'm sitting on an airplane and I'm like 30,000 feet up in the sky, flying along at like 600 miles per hour, I don't want to be some sort of relativist who says, well, there's no such thing as truth. I want to know that this thing's going to get me from here to there. I want to know that things work. I want to know that there is such a thing as truth. I also want to know that there's such a thing as goodness. Because again, like the lonely relativist who's caught up in their own world has a hard time affirming that there is suffering in this world, actual suffering and potential suffering, and I am a moral agent. It's no consolation in the long run to say, well, I'm a moral relativist. Where does that leave you? That kills your conscience. That drives you to despair, like you're just saying. I'm a moral agent. And the world needs me to be authentic, to be real, to care about truth, and to enact goodness, effectively to love. There are different kinds of love. There are appropriate ways to love in with different relationships. But the world needs me to love. I need to love the truth. I need to love goodness, and I need to love myself as an agent of both. So that's what I mean by discovering. Yeah, we create these. That's fine. But it might be better to say that we discover the conditions by which we all flourish. And that's dialogical. We were talking earlier before this began about the importance of a conversation. We've got to talk. It's like, I've got these insights because I've lived this life. You have your insights because you've lived your life. If you and I can talk, we have generated a bigger world of meaning than if we hadn't talked. So human beings should talk. And not just talk, but create diverse conversations. It's like the deeper meaning of diversity. It's the one that is to be cherished and to be cultivated. The importance of diverse conversations among people who've lived different lives, but who are willing to share their insights.
Yeah, because how can we solve problems when we don't talk? And how can we discover anything new?
Yeah, I don't know anything about the sorts of, joys and sufferings that you've experienced. And if I came across them, maybe I wouldn't know what to do. But if you were there, you'd be like, I've got this. Don't worry about it. Here's what happens. And we all benefit.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, to your point of diversity, right? Sometimes if a government in itself, tying it back, if a government is supposed to identify what the subordinates are, but the subordinates, who follow the government or who are part of the government are so diverse, then it's taking out the essence or the similarities between all these diverse groups to try to form a consensus that is perhaps an umbrella that encompasses all of what they're trying to accomplish, right? All the truths that they're trying to accomplish, right? Because then how can we get to a government that is just and meaningful, right? Like you said.
Yeah, well, how can you have every truth be true at the same time, especially if they contradict each other? Kind of thing. Is that?
Well, in that case, there's all the more need to talk. I mean, one of the big points that that really hit home for me years and years ago, when I was reading Thomas Aquinas, was that he makes a point that the order of things in truth is the order of things in being. And if you unpack that a little bit, what that means is that we each are coming from our different experiences and how we've made sense of those. We have our own insights that we've affirmed to be true. But we have only partially experienced all that there is to experience and to know and to judge as true. So, we could say, well, my truth and your truth, and we want to get to some higher viewpoint. Well, of course we do. Of course we do. And there's always a higher viewpoint. The danger that I see is that we put too much emphasis on what people are rather than on who they are. And what I mean by that is thinking in terms of group identities, which are important, but they're not the final word on what human persons are, because human persons are persons. Because we can look at somebody who on the face of it seems, so completely different from one's own self and make a fallacious judgment that, I can know nothing about that person and that person can know nothing about me. So there's nothing that we can share. But the reality of it is that, and this is just anecdotal, I hope it serves the point. I was watching the news, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and it was a news report on the famine that's occurring right now in the Yemen. And it's all bound up with part of the civil war that's going on there. And Saudi Arabia are sort of ethnically involved with, whatever I can't even remember if it's the majority of the minority ethnic group in the Yemen. But anyway, you've got a war, you've got a famine, and it's a mess. And I remember looking at this report, and there was a mother with her young daughter who might be like 18 months old, who was starving. And, and all the signs of absolute starvation were there. The distended stomach, the gaunt face, the eyes that seemed to be too big for the face. And when the news report ended, the reporter just said, we filmed this, this mother and child like 2 days ago, but the child has since died. And there was something about that just killed me. I still kind of get sort of emotional about it. Well, I don't know who she is. And also, if we're doing group identity stuff, guess what? I'm not an ethnic Yemeni. I'm not Islamic. I'm not female. I'm not 18 months old. I mean, you could keep proliferating all this out. Mm-hmm. So according to, we go by group identity only, that sort of mantra, it means that I ought to have absolutely no compassion whatsoever. That broke my heart. That little person. So, and it's like a feeling of helplessness. I'm sitting here in Texas watching that. So yeah, we need to talk. And we need to talk because we need to meet each other as persons. If you can meet somebody as a person, then guess what? You could get to love what their group is. You can really learn to love it because it's populated by persons and you've cultivated a love of persons.
Yeah, but that's a very interesting point that you mentioned because, it goes to the idea like we sometimes hear news about shootings, like for example, the shooting that just happened in Detroit where 3 students got killed by their own classmate. And it's like, there's so much of that or so much pain, even though I am not a high schooler anymore, but I've been through it, even though I'm, not living in Detroit, but, I live in the US. There's certain things that, they're not the same, but the essence, I guess what I'm getting from your example, Dr. Greenaway, is that we get to share the experience of humanity and we know what pain feels like. And so we can, to a certain degree, put ourselves in their shoes and be compassionate about what they might be going through, even though we might never have the experience exactly of what they exactly went through, but we can only imagine. And it's through being human and being, I guess, like you described it, loving as well, is that we come to the consensus that, even though that they are a human being, they're not just particles. They're not just like, oh, it existed and then it went away. It was a living human being that was, to due to the circumstances, killed, right, or suffered death, right. And the reporter was there, and why didn't he do anything, or we could think of all of these things, right. But the essence of humanity is something that I think it's kind of maybe gone away now with new ideals, right? Because we hear about all these shootings and sometimes like horrible stories in the news, and we can sit back and just sometimes have that pass through our heads, just because, well, what does that have to do with me, right? Sometimes that's, I guess, the egoistic part sometimes, or I don't know if I should call it egoistic, but sometimes the nature of some ideals that are being, pushed on today is like, well, why does that matter to me? It's not even close to my reality of what I'm experiencing. So, I'll go on with my life and, keep doing whatever I'm doing right now at the moment. So, but what would you say to someone that has maybe that ideal, like, or is there something that you've noticed in history that we've kind of separated from that humanistic side of things, that disconnects us from people across the continent?
Well, first of all, I think that you said something there about the essence of our humanity, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I think the essence of being human is being a person. And right at the center of that, I mean, we were talking about truth and goodness earlier. We discover our obligation towards truth and goodness through conscience. So you mentioned history, and I know that the go-to bad guy, and deservedly so, is somebody like Hitler. But you can throw in there, Stalin as well, and any other sort of brutal tyrant, and there are plenty of them. And here are people who simply don't care. Sometimes we think that the opposite of love is quite simply hatred. And the more devastating opposite, I would say, is indifference. It's like, I literally don't care. I don't care. What I do care about is this great idea, or what I do care about is my own satisfaction, or whatever. I mean, you can list whatever the values are, right? The great idea being some sort of ideology. I'm going to fix the world. We're going to fix the world. They're the problem. We're the solution. Or it could just be this sort of egoism that you were talking about there. My pleasure, my profit, my convenience, my passions, my pride, whatever it might be. In other words, I'm putting me, or I'm putting us first, and everybody else could just go to hell. I would say that can only happen if either you refuse to cultivate your own conscience, or you kill your own conscience. In either case, you are doing a violence to your own self. So, I was sort of listening to what you were saying in the lead up to the question, and you mentioned about the shooting. And I don't know anything about, obviously we don't know what's going on in people's minds. But there seems to be something like a great repudiation of the truth and the goodness that is existence, that is our share of being. And so to me, this is like the deepest expression of atheism. It's when, as Nietzsche said, it's when you actively go out to destroy. You put your hand to the plow and you go out to destroy. And what better things to destroy than that which is, young, innocent, perhaps full of potential, full of beauty, full of the affirmation of life, as young people generally are. That's what real atheism is. I mean, I'm sort of thinking in terms of like the very first thing that we spoke about earlier today, and the need for God and God as being. When I have people talk to me about atheism, I find that they're actually very nice people, like super nice people, nicer people than I am, and do more for other people than I do. And yet they'll sort of throw in, I'm an atheist. And really, I don't think they are. Because even within the Christian tradition, the great commandment is to love, and to love what? God and neighbor. It's like love moves in sort of two directions at once. That if you're loving your neighbor, you don't know if you're loving God. It's what Karl Rahner called an anonymous Christian. So to me, real atheism is that sort of self-violence which results in a killing off of one's conscience. And there could be so many different reasons for that, but it results in the nihilistic activity of brutality and destruction, going into schools and shooting and killing people. And not just these great big moments. I mean, you can think about how, a parent could, be brutal over their children. You can think about how people who run a company could allow power to go to their head. You can think about middle management who allow power to go to their head. Okay, I'm pushing that a little bit. I don't really mean that about middle management. Not in the term, not nihilistically anyway. But the killing of one's own conscience is a refusal to think, and it's a refusal to properly value what needs to be valued, because there is suffering and there's potential suffering, and I have a role to play in either the furthering of suffering or in the removal or the alleviation of, or the prevention of suffering. I am a moral agent. But so I need a conscience to be able to say that.
Yeah. So it's almost like to be conscient and to promote conscience is to be right, to be a being and to promote beings, right? And so if one were to say, it kills their conscience or stops forming their conscience, that means that they're dying, and how can you, and if you lead with that ideal, then you're just promoting a structure. If one were to be the head of an organization or, a country or whatever, then it's promoting death in a way, right? Because it's like, who wins? Well, only the ones at the top, right? The other ones get pushed down, and if they die, well, they died, and that's what their mission was. They served, they were a means to an end, and they helped us push forward to what, right? That's the question, I guess. But I think it was something interesting, killing the being, would eventually lead to no politics, because that's why we, like, to the point that we made at the beginning, you need being to have politics. You need to have people creating meaning to have politics, because if you kill the conscience, if you kill the being, then what is there to build? There's nothing to build. There's no reason to build. There's why build an organization? Why have politics? Why?
And you need persons to be able to think and value, to be able to, like we've been saying, to love. Institutions don't love. And algorithms and bureaucracies don't love. They have their priorities. They have their functions. Even to conceive of people as merely a group. Well, groups don't necessarily love either. So who loves? Persons love. And so to be able to put politics to work, you have to ask, well, what does politics aim at? And this is pretty clear in the Federalist Papers, by the way. Here's the Irish guy talking, right? I've read many of the Federalist Papers. I find that my students have not. And there's a philosophical anthropology in there. And it's very, very profound. At least it draws from some very profound sources. But the point is made in there that politics aims at justice and the common good. So, there's no algorithm for justice. And the common good can't be programmed. All of these depend upon persons who cultivate their own personhood, who learn what flourishing really means, who are dedicated to the good and meaningful life of themselves and others, who see themselves as participating in the reality of other people. In other words, a community of persons, and a genuine sort of communion of persons. This is where the common good comes from. It means that I care that you're not suffering. And if you are suffering, is there something that I can do about it? Is there something that we could do about it? Because when you flourish, I flourish. And so it's that sort of perspective. And obviously justice is immensely important in this, but you don't get those. You don't get anything like that unless you've got persons. So like a government bureaucracy could do its best to guarantee the conditions by which people flourish. But it's the people themselves who need to take responsibility and do this and look out for each other. So obviously you can hear that I have a philosophical anthropology here, that I believe that people should be free because I think people should be responsible. I believe that people should be educated. And I mean not just trained to do useful stuff. I mean genuinely educated in the sense of growing their soul, coming to know who they are, not just as atomized people floating in a vacuum, but as already intrinsically in relation, and those relations matter. And when you do well, I'm doing well too. So why don't we talk? Why don't we work together? Why don't we build each other up? Why don't we live the common good? Yeah. So it's concrete, but it's also something, always an ideal to strive after. So sorry, Steele, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, because that made me think, without conscience, it seems what we're leading up to is, without conscience, you don't care about your neighbor, care about your community. So then it kind of falls apart, the structures that we need. And that ties into politics, it ties into government, it ties into, I would even say, maybe a healthy society, for lack of a better word. Because without conscience, then you don't care about the well-being of others. And then, well, like what you were saying with politics, you have nothing to strive towards in terms of,
sometimes to go out and look for a human face. Now, and what I mean by that is like a human face. I mean, obviously there are lots of people around, lots of them. And I'm not talking about masks either, by the way. But to really go out and look for the human face is to go out and look for the people who could really do with what one has to offer. And sometimes it's hard to find that human face because, we're not comfortable with those who suffer. we tend to go into ghettos, they go into prisons, they go into the shadows. One of the things that I've been doing is, I've not very much of it now, but I've been trying to let victims and survivors of human trafficking have a voice, speak for themselves, just to tell their story and share their story. Because again, they've lived a life that I have not, but they're a person and I care. And you're not necessarily going to be able to find somebody who's being trafficked very easily. So the point I'm making is that sometimes it takes a bit of effort on our part to intentionally go out and find those people who really do have something to say and something that we can really learn from because of the abject conditions in which they've had to live. So, like, it's
really finding the things that we can relate to, the similarities, right? That draw us to actually ask, right? We see that they're human, we are human, right? In essence. And so to inquire about their experience serves a benefit to both, because they get to share it and you get to hear it, and it enriches both people's concept of reality, right? Because when one stays stuck in one's just idea of reality, it can sometimes draw some people to make egoistic decisions that are based off of themselves, right? Oh, it's just what I believe, my religion, my stuff, and so sometimes it cuts away from solutions that can maybe arise from fruitful conversations with other people. It's not to say like, oh, I'm going to convert this person, or they have to, do whatever I say. It's being in a judgment kind of free zone to be able to share these experiences, which at the end of the day serve to enrich what other people are experiencing, right? We can't turn a blind eye to realities that we know are out there, right? And I think that's one of the things that I actually had a conversation with someone today, because they were saying that Jews and Catholics cannot congregate, and I found this so interesting.
Why?
Because he said it was blasphemy to join with people who are of opposite religions, specifically, for example, in Hanukkah. And he was like, you can't go, you can't even eat the food that, and it's almost like, well,
there are cousins.
Yeah, I was telling him like, well, it's finding those similarities and the essence of human beings. And he was saying, well, like, yes, we need to convert, but then he said, well, when do you go out to convert, or when do you go out to actually have conversations with Jews, right? You need to have interfaith gatherings and that sort of thing to actually encounter other forms of reality. But I guess he was just closed off to say, like, I know the truth already, basically. And I think that goes to the comment that Steele mentioned of Socrates saying, well, sometimes we have to come in saying, well, I don't know anything, teach me, right? Yeah. And it's not to deny our knowledge or our experience, right, of reality that we have had, but it's to really be open to what other people have experienced as well, right? And I think that there's a truth in itself, just because they are also human. And so if humans are prone to seek truth, then maybe they have some sort of truth that we might not have encountered yet, or maybe that helps us or enlightens something that we do believe, but it helps us see it in a different way.
Closing yourself off to every other thing that doesn't agree with you could certainly lead to ignorance. and actually might bring you further away from truth if you really want to seek the ultimate truth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, again, it's like what I was saying about Aquinas earlier. Like, you've nothing to fear. Nothing to fear, because like the order of things in truth is the order of things in being. So being God, of course, but yeah, from Aquinas's perspective anyway. And so if it's truth that you're committed to, why would you be afraid? Why would anybody be afraid of it? There's nothing worse.
I guess maybe like for example, one of the things that he did come up with was he mentioned that it would be blasphemous just because it's a tradition that was placed in the past, right? But I think, like you said, maybe there is some fear aspect in it to say like, oh, maybe if I meet with these people, I'm going against God, right? And maybe that's the fear that he's experiencing. Like, I'm going to be doing something blasphemous because it's going to be separating me from giving glory to God, I guess, in his context.
Yeah, in cases it might be insecurity as well, the fear of your truth not being true if you come across other truths.
Yeah, and yet the great commandment, and this is in Judaism too, but sort of replacing your heart of stone with a heart of flesh, it's just to love. So, by the way, I didn't come on here tonight to just talk about love, but it just seems to be a theme that
a resounding theme. Yeah.
Big, one of the things that I talk about in my classes is, my introductory philosophy class is the Allegory of the Cave. How could one not talk about Plato's Allegory of the Cave? Yeah. And you have these two basic movements. You have the prisoner who, for some reason, is unchained. Okay, so all the prisoners at the bottom of the cave, they've been there since they were babies. They're not even able to look around. They're all chained up. They're facing their screen, right? With images on their screens, all they can look at, the side of the cave. And one of them is released and dragged away, and dragged up and out of the cave. And on the way out, there's a fire, and he sort of sees the source of the light that's in the cave. And he can also see all the little sort of models that are being put in front of the fire, and their shadows are being cast on the wall, what I called the screen earlier, that they've been looking at all their life. And it's pointed out to him that this is a higher reality than what you were looking at. And he's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. Right? The guy can't handle the truth. But eventually, it's so overwhelming. He has to humble himself to it.
Yeah.
But he's dragged further up and out. And it's physically difficult. It's spiritually difficult. He's falling, he's stumbling, he's being blinded. It's all new. And there's more light metaphorically representing the truth. So eventually he's out, and he accommodates himself to life outside the cave. And he feels the heat of the sun. Instead of shadows of models, he sees actual animals or whatever, and trees. And he's delighted. And then he remembers his fellow prisoners, his people, back down in the cave, and he's sorry for them. He wants them to experience this. Here's a guy who loves the truth, but who realizes that it's not just for him. And so there's another love at play here. And it's to go back down into the cave. So this, I'm picking up on what you said earlier about, whoever this guy is that you were talking about, is like, keep them separate. If you've got something that is so precious and so beautiful to share, and some people that you think are worth sharing it with, then you're basically obliged to go to where they're at and to share it with them. And it's not necessarily going to work out very well. And Plato, he's pretty clear. He knows what happened to Socrates. He goes down. The prisoner's like, if you want, I will unchain you. I will give you freedom, but like, don't touch the chains. Don't touch the chains. If you turn around your soul, there's light, there's more, there's beauty. I'll unlock your chains. Don't touch the chains. Like, there's a lot in that. And as Plato said, if he goes and if any of them can get their hands on him, they'd thrash him to pieces. They'd kill him, because he knows exactly what happened to Socrates. And if you're Christian, you know what happened to Christ. You know what happened. I said earlier that indifference is the opposite of love. Yeah, it is. But it's like, at the other side, there's another opposite, and it really is hatred. And that could be, in its own way, it can be so destructive, because you're really touching people. You're really touching them deeply, and they don't want it. So, but you're still obliged to share the truth. If you love the truth, you love people too. So,
yeah, well, thank you very much. I think we've gotten really some really good points to help us with just our understanding of being and how that works into the meaning of what it means to be human, and how that correlates with structures. Is there any final thoughts that you just kind of want to leave as we finish the podcast?
Yeah, well, since we've been talking about love, I might as well finish on something about that.
Yeah.
You know, the field that I'm in is a wonderful field. And I'm absolutely privileged to be at St. Mary's and to be working in the philosophy department and to be working as a philosopher. And every privilege needs to be justified. But I think one way that any philosopher, and this is not just for like professors or philosophy majors, for anybody who cares about living the right way, I think we can all justify whatever privileges we have if we understand that philosophy, which usually is translated as love of wisdom, because literally that's what it is, a love of wisdom, truth, goodness, beauty, justice.
Back to love.
Flip those terms. The wisdom of love. There was a Jewish philosopher called Emmanuel Levinas, and he made that point very, very strongly. Yeah, you can understand philosophy as love of wisdom, and that can lead you into all sorts of abstractions. But if you want to make it concrete, you think about it as the wisdom of love, and that puts you into contact with real people in real situations, and the prospect that some people can flourish and some people can suffer, and I might just be a moral agent. Maybe I've got something to contribute. So that's an invitation to cultivate one's conscience and to love.
So. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your final comments on this, and really, again, we're super thankful for having accepted the invitation to come on the podcast.
Yeah, it's a great thing you've got going here.
And we look forward to maybe having you in another podcast in the near future. But thank you very much again. And for all of our viewers out there, if there's something that you found interesting that you would like to comment, please feel free to leave your comments down below. We would love to read them through and answer any questions that you have. Also, subscribe to our channel to continue receiving some awesome content. And until next time, we will see you soon.